last video, we met Rudy, who was lucky enough to have known Joy, the owner of Muscle House by the Sea. Rudy actually lived in Muscle House by the Sea and heard a lot about Steve Reeves, who had already left the house and was making movies in Europe. If you missed that video, check it out on this channel, as it is the first video in this Joy and Muscle House by the Sea series. There are a couple of never-before-seen photos of Joy that you do not want to miss. One of the photos is with Zabo, who lived at Muscle House for a short period of time. In this video, we're going to explore Joy's background and find out how she ended up in Santa Monica, California. According to public records, Fleurette Crettaz was born March 13, 1891 in France. She told Rudy that she left France to fulfill her dream of becoming a United States citizen. She was very patriotic and had a Stars and Stripes banner hanging outside of her house at 160 Hill Street, Santa Monica, California. Rudy told me that he doesn't know much about Joy's life before Muscle House by the Sea. He thought she had never married and didn't have children. She never talked about her younger years. I have found myself very intrigued with Joy and wanted to know more, and so thanks to the internet, I'll share with you what I have found. I feel like Joy was a very instrumental person in Steve Reeves' young life, as you will find out by the end of this video series. I've discovered that prior to her moving to Santa Monica, sometime in the 1940s, Joy lived in San Francisco. She had been married and divorced. She had a patent for a seatbelt, and she was a governess for a musical family in San Francisco who adored her. According to public records, Fleurette Crettaz lived in San Francisco in 1929 and was married to Donald Johnstone. A 1930 San Francisco census lists Fleurette's age as 34 years old, which would be 5 years younger than her birth record, and Donald Johnstone as 39 years old. There was also a boarder or roomer living with them by the name of Maureen Whelan, age 25. They lived in a rented home, what looks to be an apartment, at 2595 Washington Street in San Francisco. They paid $75 a month for rent. Donald was originally from Louisiana, his parents from Scotland. Fleurette lists her parents as being from Switzerland. Neither she nor her husband attended college. Fleurette lists French as a spoken language. Her husband lists engineer as his vocation, as well as the Marines. The record shows Fleurette as a teacher at a private school. My guess is that she taught French. Although he lists Marine, Donald lists no for veteran. Fleurette changed her name in 1931 from Marie Delphine Johnstone to Fleurette Crettaz Johnstone. At this point, records show she still lived in San Francisco at 2595 Washington Street. In 1933, she was living on Pierce Street in a rented apartment. I'm assuming she was divorced from Donald at this point, as the record shows Miss Fleurette Crettaz. Before she moved to Long Beach, records show that she worked as a governess to a musical family in San Francisco with a son named James Schwabacher. James was deeply involved in the San Francisco Symphony Orchestra for most of his adult life, serving as the third president of the San Francisco Symphony Foundation. James remembers both Leonard Bernstein and Henry Steinway being guests in his childhood home. His family had made their fortune in office supplies. So I found an interview on James Schwabacher, and the name of the interviewer, last name Crawford. Crawford says, yes, you spoke about a very special governess. Schwabacher, oh, she was something very special. Fleurette Crettaz, she was from Paris. I remember when she first came to see us, she brought balloons, and I can still see what she was wearing. She was wearing some kind of a fuzzy brown dress, like a camel hair dress. I can still remember how soft it was. We were terribly close, and from time to time, when Mom and she didn't agree about how the kids were raised, I took Mademoiselle's part always. We called Joy Mamoy. It was very odd, but at the same time, she was the one who sat next to me every morning when I practiced my piano. Joy taught me how to do every little ablution in the morning, how you held your soup dish when you took the last spoonful of soup out of the soup bowl, and she loved music. But the big thing, of course, was that she taught us French. And I think if I have any of it left now, it's partly because of her, because we would have to learn these long poems and we would memorize poems in French and also in English. Crawford, what do you remember? Schwabacher, the one about a little acorn. Oak trees from little acorns grow. That was one, and then the fables of La Fontaine in French. In one, a girl was carrying this huge box of eggs on her head, and she was dreaming about what she was going to do when she sold these eggs. And of course, she slipped and the eggs broke, so her dream was gone. And then I remember the story about the fox and the crow. The fox obviously wanted to get that crow. Was it a crow or a bird of some kind? And the fox was so clever and kept telling the bird how beautiful she was. Won't you come a little closer so I can see all your beautiful wings? And so forth. So as the bird came closer, he was able to catch the bird because of having over complimented the bird. Those were all the things that we had learned in French. Crawford. Well, Fleurette really raised you at home and educated you at home for several years, didn't she? Schwabacher. Yes, she was only there those 2 years, and despite the strange things she did, I never think of that. I remember the last time I saw her was as a grown man while singing St. Matthew Passion in Los Angeles, and Joy was running a house at Muscle Beach in Santa Monica for the muscle men who'd go out to the beach at Santa Monica and hang by their knees. So did she. She ran a house for these circus performers and bodybuilders. She was always a health nut. I even remember after she left us, she would take us out, for example, near the bandstand at the park in San Francisco. And for lunch, we'd have things like walnuts and carrots and celery, this kind of thing. She was way ahead of her time in that way, and she lived into her 80s. But I went out to see her that last time one morning between my rehearsal times, and I remember she gave me strawberries, which were delicious, with lots of sliced coconut. And when there's that much coconut, it doesn't taste so good. You know, I love coconut on a cake or something, but I didn't enjoy that. But it was wonderful seeing her again, and I have letters that were from her. I can still see her handwriting. The strange thing was that she had the highest ideals when she was with us, and then at nighttime she'd be a hostess at a dance parlor. There she met a sailor who married her, Donald, and he beat her up, and she had an awful life. And then she went to Los Angeles, and she was connected with something called the I Am movement. It was one of those religious movements where the leader was completely false, and all her money went to him, and he was eventually sent to jail. Public records show that Fleurette moved to Long Beach, California in 1939. She worked as a French teacher and lived at 938 Pacific Avenue. Around 1940, she moved to Pasadena, lived at 600 South Orange Grove Avenue, and worked as a maid. She was 49 years old. In 1943, Pasadena records show that she had a couple of patents on an infant toilet seat and an infant belt. Her next move was to 160 Hill Street in Santa Monica, California, which would become the world-famous Muscle House by the Sea, housing bodybuilders like Steve Reeves, George Eiferman, Zabo, our friend Rudy, and many more. Rudy told me that Joy originally wanted just single women at her house, but when she met Steve, she decided to change her mind because he was so nice and polite. Joy became like a second mother to a lot of the bodybuilders. If they were broke, she would help them. Rudy says, I used to work out with Zabo at Muscle Beach Weightlifting Club. Zabo was a nice guy, very easygoing, just like his buddy Armand Tanny, a former Mr. USA. They dated a lot of girls at Muscle Beach. Joy used to say they were sinners and would go to hell. I told Joy that I wanted to go there also. It seemed all the nice guys I admired were there too. That's coming from Rudy. Joy was pissed off with me for several days and said I would never be like Steve. She thought that Steve was almost a saint, but in reality, Steve was a cool operator from what his buddies told me about him, and a real gentleman too. Armand and Zabo could be real mean street fighters if challenged. Zabo was a womanizer and used to drink a lot, but still had fantastic abs. Joy used to go to sleep very early at night and get up very early in the morning, going to the beach, doing exercises on the rings and parallel bars. As soon as she was asleep, we gathered around the TV to watch Playboy Penthouse with Hugh Hefner. Sometimes in the afternoon, I watched the Soupy Sales show or Woody Woodpecker. The guys used to joke with me that that was for little kids, but they also sometimes looked at it with me. I had a very friendly relation with all those guys in the house. I feel like this was my home away from home, and this was my American family, says Rudy. Joy was kind of a mother to all of us. She used to worry about each of us like she really was our mother. But the end of 1961 was coming close. I was running out of money, and so with a heavy heart, I packed and left for South America. The day I left, it was a very sad day for me. I spent some of the happiest days of my life there. You asked me many times about Joy. Yes, she was almost a saint and our guardian angel. I left there something that is very hard to explain. Once again, that's Rudy telling us about his time at Muscle House by the Sea. In the next video in this series, we're going to be looking at a book that Joy gave to Steve that really changed the trajectory of Steve's mindset, of his thinking. Make sure you share and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.